Welcome to the Jeffrey van Leeuwen podcast, episode 2. Today I'll be talking to Cole Driescher, a dedicated husband and father from Phoenix, Arizona. We're going to explore his journey through life, the challenges he's encountered, the influence that Jordan Peterson has had on him, and the insights he's gained along the way. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and if you find it interesting, a follow, like, or subscribe, depending on the platform you're listening on, would be greatly appreciated. And now, here is Cole Driescher. So Cole, what were the key moments in your upbringing that shaped who you are today?
So I was born in Arizona here in the United States, and I was raised in a smaller town. I would say that the population of the town I was raised in was probably like 10,000 or so people. And so it's where I went to elementary school, middle school, and high school. And I was actually raised by my grandparents. And so I had probably a little bit more of an old school upbringing, probably more traditional values. They were a little bit more conservative. And so small town, raised by my grandparents. And when I graduated, I was 17 and I decided to move down to more towards the southern end of Arizona in a small town called Casa Grande. And it was just kind of like an industrial town, and I got a job working in a warehouse, and I was working quite a bit, and I decided to get an apartment on my own. And at that point, I was just, I think that right around then is probably when I first started listening to Jordan Peterson. I think he first came to prominence. I had heard about him probably in like 2016, I think, when Bill C-16 had come up, and he had kind of taken a public stance against the bill. And it was interesting because I just started listening to him, and he had a really big influence on the way that I looked at things. And so I started to, I had an opportunity to reconnect with a girl that I had gone to high school with, and we ended up dating, and we got married, and I have my son now, and we're living in Phoenix, so it's kind of like more central Arizona. But I would say that's probably how I got my start, and kind of the path that's led me to this point right now.
Yeah, it's quite a bit already. So you said originally you came from Arizona in a small town over there with 10,000 people. How was general life over there? And what's the town's name you said?
It was it's called Chino Valley.
Chino
and so,
Valley.
I would say that it was like a pretty relaxed little town. So pretty neighborly. So most of the time you would know a lot of your neighbors. You would see people at the store somewhat regularly. But yeah, pretty quiet for the most part, just going to school over there. I didn't really do much outside of, go run around outside and, hang out with friends and everything like that. I guess kind of the more typical childhood.
Yeah, so with a town that size, would you say that everybody pretty much knew each other? You mentioned already that you saw most people quite, every now and then.
Yeah, I would certainly say that there were certain organizations within the town that brought together like large swaths of the community. And so I would imagine that a lot of the parents would know each other, all their kids went to the same school. It was big enough to where you would still meet plenty of people that you didn't know, but it was small enough to where you would see the people that you would see on a fairly regular basis in multiple spots. So, for instance, if I had a friend, maybe our parents would see each other at school, his parents and my parents, but then they might also run into each other at the grocery store or something like that.
Right, and as a kid, would you say that you would like Chino Town, Chino Valley, or did you dream about going to, like, for example, bigger cities or to other specific places? What was your mindset about the town?
So I like the small town vibe, but I knew that I wanted a little bit more of a career, especially throughout high school. I certainly wasn't what I would call the best student. I was able to pass my classes, but I would say a really big problem for me was my work ethic. And so I knew that I wanted to leave Chino and get into like a more desirable career to establish a better life for myself, but I wasn't entirely sure what that looked like. I didn't know exactly what that path would be. And so, for instance, I was presented with an opportunity to either go to my local community college or to go out into the workforce, and I decided to go out into the workforce. At that time, I didn't really think that even if I did have a really good opportunity to go to a college that would suit me well, I don't know if I would have been a good fit necessarily for any college, just because I've already kind of had like a hard time studying growing up. There are certain classes that I'll take hyper interest in, and then there are other classes that don't really interest me very much and it feels like more of an obligation. I'm sure that people in general will feel that, but I always had a really hard time, I would say, applying myself, having the discipline to sit down and do the material.
Yeah, unless it's something that really interested you then.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. And what were the things that you were interested in as a kid?
So I would say that my family are really into cars, working on cars and building cars, repairing cars, stuff like that. So that was definitely a pretty big influence for me growing up. I would say that probably talking to people was, I would say, is probably the biggest interest that I had. I've always really enjoyed making friends. I've always really enjoyed interacting with other people. I really kind of like talking about ideas and stuff like that. And so that's, unless you're Nietzsche or something like that, that's kind of a multiple person game.
Yeah, that's the other side of the spectrum then, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And so, probably, hanging out with family is something that I did quite a lot. So my grandparents, they lived in Phoenix at the time. So I was raised by my mother's parents, so my maternal grandparents. But, my other grandparents lived down in the valley, and we would go down there maybe every third weekend. And so I guess I really always liked talking to them. One of my grandmothers, she was, I think she has her master's degree, and so she was pretty well read. And I always really liked talking to her. She had a lot of interesting ideas. She was certainly, while most of my family was more conservative, I would say that she was a lot more liberal in her political demeanor. And because of that, it was very interesting to get such a different point of view on kind of how the world worked.
Mm-hmm. And how was the political atmosphere in general within that state?
I would say, as far as Arizona, it's pretty mixed. It probably in the more rural areas, it's more conservative, and then as you get to the larger cities, I would say it gets more liberal. I don't know if I think it might just be like a general pattern of like population conglomeration. Like maybe as people get closer together, they get more liberal, like in cities. But yeah, I would say that for the most part, it's pretty mixed. I think that the last couple of political polls that I looked at showed that Arizona was a pretty purple state, so it was a good mix of conservative and liberal.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. I believe if you look at the map of the United States in general, and the more, I believe, eastwards you go, the more blue the country becomes. So it's then in the region of, for example, where New York is, where most people are Democrats, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I would say that that seems like a pretty accurate characterization. I haven't recently taken a look at a political map of the United States in a little while, but I would say, especially is like once you start getting to like the larger cities, I would definitely say that that's the case. Like, so for instance, I think that LA is pretty blue. I think that New York, like you were saying, is pretty blue. I know that there are a couple of big cities that are more conservative, but yeah, on average, I would say that Arizona is probably a pretty good mix. I have no problem finding people just like even just day to day who are very, I would say, overtly supportive of more like conservative policies, as well as people who are more overtly supportive of liberal policies. And so it's nice because when you kind of if you have like questions about maybe a certain political view on a specific topic, it's nice, especially in Arizona, because I think that you can find people like that to kind of discuss it with. I mean, you always kind of have to be careful, I think, with talking about politics. I think that some people can get a
for sure,
bit
but that goes
aggravated.
pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, true.
It's always one of the dangerous subjects. Usually on the Dutch work floor, for example, we would say that there's 3 subjects that are forbidden. That's religion, that is politics, and that is football, because all 3 of them end usually with fights.
That's very funny, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned that you were pretty much raised by your grandparents on your mother's side, I believe, right?
Yes, that's correct.
If you don't mind me asking, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but where were
Sure.
your parents in this time?
Yeah, so I would say that my mom and my dad were more they were less stable. I think growing up in their early 20s, they were a little bit more wild. They liked to go out and party and stuff like that a little bit more. Because of that, I think there was probably a harder transition for them
Hmm.
establishing a life of where, especially being a parent, there's a ton of responsibility. Obviously, you have to make sure that you have a stable household for your child. You want to make sure that you're not always arguing with your partner. You want to be able to set a good example. And there's a lot of things that become really important. And I would say that they probably my mom a little bit more so than my dad, although he certainly had his issues. Had a hard time kind of establishing that foundation, and because of that, it led to a little bit of I would say, a more contentious environment to be raising two kids. So my sister and I. Um, And I think that my grandparents had started to notice and pick up on that, and they wanted to establish a little bit more of a like a foundational building spot, at least for kids.
And you moved away to southern Arizona when you were 17. I can imagine
Yeah,
at 17, that's quite a jump.
yeah, it certainly was a jump. Yeah, I think all of my friends were going to college, and I certainly knew a lot of the um, like the data as far as like average life success and stuff like that with going to college versus not going to college. And I know that usually college can make quite a positive impact on the trajectory of people's lives. But the biggest thing that I was really worried about was debt, just because school is very, very expensive. And I've always really liked the idea of being able to choose my profession and going in and studying something specific. But I think that the fear of taking on quite a lot of debt outweighed the incentive for just going and getting a job. And I think that at least looking back on it now, obviously I've never formally like gone to college, and so I wouldn't be able to say. But I think that entering the workforce was a really, really good incentive for me to align, uh, like the psychology for me to work harder, to have more discipline, to have a little bit more structure. And it was just because it was like, well, I have bills to pay and I have, a life that needs to be kept up. So I'm just going to work because that way I can make money. And through doing that, it helped me build a little bit more of a work ethic and it helped me create a little bit more discipline.
Yeah, so it was more a practical reason for you. So you went there to work in order to build your life and to look for what you were doing. Because I believe you mentioned earlier that this was also the moment that you were still looking at what you were interested to begin with, what you wanted to do in the end as a career. And this was your start of picking up those, well, actually making the first steps towards that goal. Would that be a correct way to summarize it?
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good way of summarizing. Essentially, just trying to establish what I needed to establish in order to figure out what I wanted to do was essentially, I think, the biggest driver. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I know that if I didn't know what I wanted to do, taking out a whole bunch of money in order to figure it out seemed kind of like a bad idea. I was like, I feel like I can probably figure out this a little bit better.
Right. So if you were born in 98, that means I believe you're 25 right now, right?
Yeah, 26, just turned 26.
26. All right. So this is then 9 years ago. How have those last 9 years looked for you?
They've looked pretty good, honestly, and I would say that a big part of that would be because I started listening to Jordan Peterson. I had a really good, solid foundation as far as being raised by my grandparents. I was adopted when I was 10 months old, so I was very young. Um, but I would say that once I started listening to Jordan's content specifically, I think that helped me establish some of the bigger pieces in my life. And so it helped me realize, okay, I want to get married. I want to have a long-term relationship. Okay, it seems like a good idea to establish a career in something that you would find at least semi-rewarding. I think that one of the biggest hurdles for me as a kid was I felt like I had to have the perfect job. And if I wasn't working towards the best job that I could possibly imagine, then I was wasting my time. And it was this weird binary that I saw it in. And one of the things I remember hearing Jordan talk about was like, no matter what job it is that you're working, try and do as good as you can at that job. And at the time, I was working in manufacturing, and I had it was honestly, so this was before I had started dating my wife. And I would say that it was a lot more, there was a lot more turmoil in my life. There was a lot less security. This is the very first time that I was living by myself. I had actually originally moved out with a roommate, and that ended up not working out. And so then it was just me on my own, and I had to work enough in order to make sure I was able to pay the bills. But then I also, I had absolutely no idea how to handle money or anything like that. And so because of that, I was just spending money like extremely frivolously and not really planning on any sort of budget, which obviously just leads to more chaos. And it had kind of gotten to a point to where I'd started listening to more of Jordan's like talks, and I got a better sense and idea of what exactly it was that I wanted to do, kind of what the larger goal was. How was it that I was going to be able to build a life that I would be happy with, 10, 20, 30 years from then? And I would say that it went pretty well, and so I married a girl that I met in high school. We've been together now for over 7 years. We just had our first son. I've been working at the structural engineering firm. They do like residential homes, and so they just like spec all of the beams and everything like that for all of the homes that are being built in our area. And I'm a drafter in there, which means I'm essentially just drawing the plans. And so I work directly with engineers. They tell me how they want the house to be engineered, and then I lay that out all on our plans. And then we submit the sheets, and they go into the city. But and I've been at that job for just over 6 years as well. And it's good. We have two dogs. We have a nice place, and life is good. And I think that probably a lot of that can be chalked up to more of the higher level beliefs that I've probably picked up more from Jordan's work.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, and especially the moment. If I recap it, you left your first house when you were 17. You were looking for what you wanted to do, with life, and at some point you got into contact with this work, and then you got the tools pretty much to look ahead and look into the future to decide, okay, where do I exactly want to end up? What do I want to do in maybe 2, 5, 10, 20 years? And what are the exact steps I can take right now in order to facilitate that? And this also ties into what you said earlier. I believe what you're saying is, I think, very human in the sense people want to have the perfect. They want to be as best as they can right now. But generally speaking, that's not how it works. It takes work. It takes practice. It takes a lot of effort. And it's very important to decide for yourself, which steps you can take today in order to make tomorrow pretty much better. And I think that's what you're alluding to, and what has apparently helped you quite a bit. And congratulations on your first kid, by the way.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's oh my gosh, it's like one of the most stressful and rewarding things I've ever done. Yeah, I sometimes kind of take a look at my life and notice a little bit of a difference from my peers. I've noticed that I've worked at my job a lot longer than my friends. So even my friends that have been working significantly longer than me haven't stayed in one spot for maybe more than 2 or 3 years. There are some people who worked at their jobs longer, but I would say that there's a little bit more of like a job hunting. I've noticed that people, so even my friends who have very stable relationships and who have been in relationships for quite a while, it's kind of interesting because I'll talk to them about getting married, and they seem pretty anti-getting married. I think that might be something that's going on with the young men, maybe in society. I don't know if it's happening over there, but I would say that in the U.S. there's a little bit more antipathy as far as, or maybe trepidation is a better word for actually getting married. I think that they see a lot at risk there, which there certainly is. It's a big decision.
Yeah.
And then I've also seen a little bit of a difference with people having kids a little bit later on. They either have kids right away, so they'll have 2 or 3 kids maybe a couple years out of high school, or in my case, usually they don't have kids in their earlier mid-20s. They'll wait a little bit longer. So that's kind of interesting, I've noticed.
Yeah, I will say it's not really different over here, and I think in general it seems to be, at least to me, to be the way that the West in general is tilting. Like you said, some have it very young, usually because they are, careless, or they don't know how everything works, and a mistake happens, and then they end up with a little one. or indeed they are very career focused or very focused on themselves and maybe their direct partner and want to pursue their career and have everything in place before they make that step. And there's something to say for both of them. It kind of feels to me that it's also part of the times. That we pursue careers, which also ties into your, pretty much to use the term, job hopping, finding something new every 2 years. People want to grow. People want to, that's how it seems to me at least. People want to grow. People want to experience. People want to go on adventure. And in that specific situation, if that's the mindset that you have, then staying with the same employer for 10 years might not be what you're looking for. There's something to say for both sides, because the other side, if you truly want to master something, you would have to practice it for a very long time. So if your direct goal is to increase your salary, increase your added benefits, or increase your network or something like that, then I understand where the job hopping is coming from. But
Definitely.
if you really want to master a skill, if you really want to get good at it, if you're on the forefront in your specific branch, in your specific field, then the opposite, I think at least, might also be true. It really it's a very difficult thing to break down, because you could also make the argument that in order to get more experience, in order to get a broader lens about the job market in general, or about your field, or anything like that, you would have to take a peek within multiple companies, because else you're going to have a very singular view, a very singular perspective. So it's I don't really have a clear answer for it, but it feels to be very context dependent. Me personally, in my personal experience, I've also my general timeline about how long I stay with a company is between 2 and 6 years. 6 years being the longest so far. And I'm 33 years old, so that's not a lot of time under my belt yet, but still, that's the timeline. What do you think about that? How do you look at this, and how do you apply it to your own specific situation?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good point you made there. And I think it's very interesting because, so while you were talking, I had an idea that came to mind, and it was something like, it seems kind of interesting that as maybe, I don't know if a good word would be like careerists, but people who get into a job specifically, like, I think this was very popular in my grandparents' generation, where they would get into one job and then they would climb the ladder and they would work there for 20 or 30 years.
Yep, exactly.
And yeah, and it was interesting because in the I would also say in kind of like in the relationship category, I've noticed that people aren't getting married, I think, as much as they were before, and I can't help but think that there's probably some sort of like analog there. There's kind of like a pattern, and so I would certainly agree with you with your point when you had said if you want to be able to chase like getting paid better, getting better benefits, going around trying maybe different skills that may or may not interest you, and experimenting a little bit more like that, I would certainly say that it seems at least logical that the process would be something like, okay, well, I should collect some sort of pool of potential job opportunities and look at that, contextualize it to the current situation that I'm in, and kind of see what the pros and cons are. And if the pros is something like, well, it's gonna pay me better, maybe it's gonna give me better time off, maybe it's gonna give me better health insurance, maybe it's gonna do, have some other benefit attached to it, then that would be an incentive to move. I think that also when I had, and the reason why I mention this is because a good buddy of mine, he currently lives in California, but he also has moved from company to company, and he makes a lot more money than I do. He's very, I would say, oriented towards increasing. And I mean, I'm not, and I don't even think that's because of greed. He currently has like, I think 4 daughters. And so he's like almost forced to by necessity just because he needs the money, especially
Yeah,
living in
that
California.
makes sense.
Yeah. And so I remember when I had the idea for a while where I was thinking, I'm in a good situation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if I don't go out there looking, that I'm not going to find something that's actually a little bit better. And I had always been kind of torn with that. I think that maybe being raised by my grandparents created this kind of like interesting tension where I have, especially when I was younger, I felt a lot of pride. I probably had a pretty big ego, and I wanted to do like really what I would probably consider at the time as like very impressive things. I think that's probably how I held it as far as an identity for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I kind of felt this pull backwards of a little bit more of like I don't know if like a reserve strategy. I'm sure that at the time that's probably what I would have called it. But essentially just juxtaposing that with staying in a single space. And the one thing, especially going through and staying in one spot for a little bit longer now that I've realized, is that when I've stayed at this spot, I'm certainly not prioritizing, let's say, more concretized benefits of a specific job.
Mm-hmm.
And so that might be money, benefits, leave, something like that. But the one thing that I've really learned is how to think at different levels. And so coming into a company, I think that there's a big demand for the skill set within the role, and you want to be able to develop a really good skill set for the specific role. That way, you can be a good, performing employee. Um, After a while, you kind of master that. Master is a strong word. I certainly wouldn't say that I've mastered the work that I do, but after a while, you become a lot more competent in it than you were when you began, and you start kind of maybe metaphorically kind of picking your head up and looking around. And ever since I've done that, I've noticed that there are other opportunities on the horizon within the same company that I'm at that I can also pursue. And so, for instance, one of the things that I take a lot of joy in is learning, and I've realized that there are certain roles within my specific company that I can fulfill through education, and I can reap the benefits of the specific opportunities that are within the job. And so instead of changing, like, let's say, a physical job right now in the present, you can change your job at the same company over time, which is, essentially just climbing the corporate ladder. But that's one thing that I've really noticed is a big difference.
Yeah,
And
that makes sense.
yeah, and so if you can cultivate the skills of the things that you want, then it will provide opportunities to get those things even within the same like job that you're at. And so, for instance, if I wanted to make more money, I can go through and I can look at the different opportunities that I would have within the company that I'm at. Okay, so if I want to get paid more, I should probably, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can just like work more hours, or you can start taking on more responsibilities. And if you can identify the responsibilities that especially your company needs really well, or needs a lot, and you get good at that specific skill set, then you can trade more of the skill set for an increase in pay. But it's a little bit more of an unorthodox way of doing it, I think.
Let me see if I can get this question well. How do you balance? So you talked about getting more responsibility within the same company.
Yep.
How do you make sure that the challenges that come your way are challenges that are meaningful, as opposed to work that is not meaningful or should not be done by you or doesn't help you in any shape or form climbing that ladder? How do you balance that?
That is a really good question. I think that this is also something else that I've learned a little bit more from listening to Jordan's work. When he talks about meaning, it's a little bit vague at first, especially when I heard it. I didn't quite know what he meant. But one of the things that he would talk about tangentially related to that was the depth of certain ideas. And so I remember listening to a talk by him once where he was talking about, you can always tell when a conversation that you're having is deep. It feels like you're engrossed in the conversation. It feels like the topics are very interesting to you. You feel like you're kind of being pulled in a specific direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that I think that in my layman's terms, because outside of Jordan Peterson, I have no contact with any sort of like intellectual or academic psychological sort of study or anything like that. But it seems to me like the meaning of things is essentially like a stacked narrative or a stacked set of ideas. And so the more fundamental the base idea is, as you stack up, the higher your stack, the more meaningful things become. And so to concretize this, I would say something like, I studied drafting in high school. And that was a big reason why I was able to get into the drafting field without a degree. And I've never particularly found drafting as like deep, meaningful work. Do you know what I mean? Like, I really love people and I love talking to people. I love working with people. And so, as far as like a more immediate sense of meaning, you would think that maybe a better field for that would be like some sort of like psychological work, maybe as like a therapist or something like that, as a social worker, or maybe even doing something a little bit more practical, maybe not practical, but a little bit more direct and immediate would maybe be like some sort of civil servant, whether it be maybe like a firefighter or a nurse or something like that.
Hmm.
I could see being a nurse or a doctor as being very fulfilling because you're working directly with the patients. You're able to really directly see the impact that you have on their lives. But I would say that how I'm able to create meaning in my specific job as being a draftsman is I'm able to line up the different areas of my life maybe a little bit better. So I know that it's going to be helping me build a life that I find a lot of joy and meaning from. So I really love my wife. She's great. We've been through a lot. We've been through thick and thin. And so I have a lot of joy and meaning in my relationship with her. And I know that this job, while maybe the specific work, the minutia of what I'm doing is not necessarily the most um, immediately interesting thing that I could be doing. It's feeding into something that has a lot of deep satisfaction, and that is going to be, trying to get a house for my wife and I, being able to provide for our son, and then at the same time, I'm still able to build a skill set, and so that would be like the next layer up. And so even
Yeah,
though
that
I'm
makes sense.
contributing to my familial situation, at the same time, I'm still doing some level of personal development because I'm able to understand, okay, well, I have this skill set and it's not exactly clear what the skill set is. Some of it certainly is drafting. Some of it is a knowledge of how buildings are engineered. I would also say some of it is going to be learning how to communicate. I think with engineers, they're a very unique type of people, and they're very smart, and they don't necessarily communicate in the way that I would default to. And so that's really helped me kind of understand maybe a different context for interacting with people. And I think as you stack the different layers of your life, the deeper the meaning becomes for you in relation to whatever it is that you're doing. And so, if I absolutely hated talking to people and I had a job as like a waiter or something like that, I would probably it would be a lot harder to stack that because it's directly putting it in opposition to maybe I don't know if I would call it my natural state, but my like predisposition in life. But if you have something that maybe isn't necessarily directly feeding into the most immediately interesting set of actions that you can take, I think that it's still going to be able to build a good platform for you to get to that point. And so, for example, one of the things that I've always really wanted to do is own a business. And I can see a pathway within the current company that I'm in to be able to actually help run the business and to own part of it. Hopefully at some point down the road. I'm sure it's going to be a while. But even then, just kind of taking the specifics of your situation and being able to stack it, I think provides more meaning, even if the individual layer itself isn't necessarily intrinsically meaningful.
And why is starting a business for you meaningful? So the reason why I'm asking is you are describing the concept of building a foundation, and you've said it a couple of times. So building a foundation that you can stack upon, that is what is meaning, and the higher you can stack it, the more meaningful it is. It's actually a very good way to describe it. I believe it was, if you look at it from a scientific perspective, for example, you can look at papers that are being written and being published, and the more they are being referred to, the more meaningful they are because other work depends on it. So
Right.
a different way to phrase that would be that the more meaningful something is, the more is dependent on that, which
Yeah.
makes perfect
Yeah.
sense also in your situation that you wanted to provide the foundation for your family, for your work, for your life, for your future, and for your direct environment. You were laying the foundation. You were stacking different things of value on top of that in order to provide something that is meaningful for your direct environment. So with
Right.
that context in mind, how else does the starting the own company tie into that story?
I would say that it's probably just the next layer to kind of continue building that meaning.
Check.
So it's like something like, what's a good way of one of the things that Jordan has really helped me do is kind of put words to certain things that are not necessarily material and are a little bit more abstract. They're a little bit harder to get a grip on.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that one of those things is like narrative. And so one of the things that I think is absolutely incredible that he's taught me is that we all live in a narrative. And so I think that one of the things that I'd heard him talk about at one point was many people nowadays hold like fundamental axioms of like a materialistic rationalist. And it's certainly a very powerful way of looking at the world, but I think that one of the things that it can really miss out on is this aspect of meaning. And I think that lining up the blocks will create a larger narrative and will create deeper meaning in your life. And so, for instance, if I pursue specific opportunities within my life, it will have, maybe one opportunity, let's say, for instance, will have less opportunity than another. And so maybe a good example of this, just for me specifically, I would say is something like, okay, well, if I want to create the most meaning that I can, it seems to me more meaningful to own a part of a company or be a major mover in a specific company to create value in my local community than I would say it would be to, let's say, work a job that maybe I don't necessarily have that much interest in, and then to not kind of try and increase the amount of influence that I have within that company, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
It
so I
seems
think
like,
I think what you're saying, if I'm summarizing it correctly, is you're not saying that um, one job or the other is more meaningful than the other, but what you are saying is that with your capacity and your skill and your background, you can provide way more meaning by doing this, by leveraging the skills that you have in order to get this off the ground and directly provide value to your community. Would that be a fair way to summarize it?
yeah, I think it certainly would be. And I would say specifically tacking on the piece that you had asked me before about what specifically about starting a company interests me, I
Mm-hmm.
would say maybe a good way of describing that is like legacy. Something where it's like I can help build something that my friends are being able to take a part in. Maybe there are other people out there who have a desire to get in this specific field, and I can help them get into the field. Maybe at some point, if any of my kids have any sort of interest in any work that I do, they have the opportunity to kind
Mm-hmm.
of do that. And it creates a larger narrative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you believe in the concept of hard work?
Um, yeah, I would certainly say that something like hard work exists. I think that it's probably depends a little bit on what the individual means when they say it. I think that there's at least two that come to mind where somebody can say, well, you should really work hard. And the idea is something like you should do a lot more self-sacrifice in order to make things in the world happen. And then I think that there are other people who are very hardworking, but if you were to ask them, wow, you have so much discipline. It's like incredible how much self-sacrifice you have in order to make things happen around you in the world. I would say that they would probably, it seems like they would push against that a little bit more. They're like, well, I'm not really sacrificing anything. This is what I want to do.
And for
And
you,
so,
would you say hard work or work smart?
yeah, I would certainly say that you should be able to do both, but one leverages the other. And so if you have the capacity to work hard and then you know what you should be working on, that's going to be a ton of leverage versus if you know what you want to work on, but you don't really want to work, that's not going to get you very far. And if you are good at working hard, but you don't really know what you want to work on, you're not going to be able to get as far. And I think that it's the alignment of maybe something like incentive and fear. It's like maybe self-sacrifice for something else is maybe it's a little bit more fear-based. It's like, okay, I need to do something now. That way I can avoid something later or I can get something later. And it's like a fear of an outcome, whereas the desire to invest and to grow something is more of like an incentive. I remember I've kind of dabbled in woodworking a few times, and I'm not very good at it, but the more that I do, the better I get. And so I remember when I first started, it was a feeling that I'd almost never felt before in my life, where I woke up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, I wonder if it would be too early to run my table saw, and my neighbors would get mad at me because I just like felt this passion or this drive to
Yeah.
get out there super early just because I was excited with what I was working on. And I would say that's a good example of kind of that incentive aspect.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Usually I find that people have one or the other. So there's a group that says, you need to work hard, because if you don't work hard, you will not reach anything, or you will not provide value for your community, or something like that. And you have the other group. It's more, I don't know if it's pessimistic, but it's definitely a different way to think about it. That says, working hard is not really necessary. As long as you work smart and get the job done, you're good to go pretty much. And I really like the
Right.
way that you use the word leverage, because I fully agree with that. The moment you are interested in something and you can think about how to best apply your skills in order to do a specific job, then you can create, because you mastered it, because you are very good at it, you can create a process that is not difficult in its essence, and therefore makes your ability to execute that job a lot easier because you are doing it smart. But if you combine that indeed with working hard, there is so much more that you can do within the same amount of units of time, pretty much. So I really like the way that you lay that out. That's a quite a good way.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that, so one of the people that I listen to on YouTube quite frequently is Alex Hormozy. And I would say that he's certainly somebody who believes in working hard. I think that he has he talks about frame a lot, and breaking frame. And I had heard him talk about the rule of 100. So a good friend of mine, he has just gotten into sales, and
Hmm.
right now his main form of acquisition is just cold calling. And I had asked him how much he had done per day, and his answer was something like not enough. And I had told him, have you ever thought about like implementing this rule of 100 that Alex Hormozy talks about? And it's something like 100 primary actions to get you closer to your goal. And I would say that
Okay.
Alex Hormozy is somebody who's really good at framing that you have to be able to work hard. You have to be able to sit down and make the 100 cold calls every day. But you also have to make sure that, if you don't have a bigger reason for doing it, kind of what you were talking about, if there's not something that excites you or something that you're intrinsically passionate about, then you're essentially like living your life like rubbing, just sandpaper on open wounds. It's just like you can do it, and it's going to be really hard, and there might be some sort of benefit at the end of the day, but you don't fundamentally believe that you're kind of going in the correct direction.
Yeah, or it can go the completely opposite way. If you're working hard but you're doing it the wrong way, you can actually have a net negative value to your community, which might not be very much what you want to do in the first place. So it doesn't. Yeah, it's not the
And I
correct way
would
to
say
approach it.
that yeah, and I think that also breeds resentment too, because I think that there are some people out there who, I've had friends that I've gone to school with who are incredibly smart, and just talking to them, it was crazy. They were like in very advanced classes in, conjunction or in comparison to all of the rest of their peers, including me,
Yeah.
and they were very articulate. They could write an essay on some sort of complicated topic. I actually remember this. I had gone to school with a gentleman, and he was in my English 101 class, and we were doing dual enrollment in high school. And it was interesting because I remember we had to like write an essay or something like that on, I don't know, some sort of old philosophical book or whatever book we were reading at the point in the class.
Right.
And it was like a 5-page essay or something like that. And he had left it all to like the afternoon. I think that English was it was our last period of the day, And at lunch, he just like wrote all 5 pages, like just right off the bat, and he just got an A. And it was crazy because I couldn't do that. But
Right.
I would say that there are some people who are maybe like that, but for whatever reason, they have a hard time kind of finding that direction. And then there can be a little bit of resentment bred from that because obviously, if they're incredibly smart, they're going to know that they're very unhappy. And asking very vague and abstract questions like, what is it that I want to do with my life? Um, I don't know if I've ever met any individual in person who, if you ask them that question, they were able to spit off an answer right off the top with all of the details kind of constructed about how this is going to be their plan of attack. I mean, obviously those people exist. You see incredibly successful people everywhere in the world. But I would say that there can be a little bit of resentment that can be bred from that, especially if you decide, well, I don't know what I want to do, but I'm going to work hard. And you start working hard, and then you feel like you're actually moving away from the place that you were wanting to go, like what you were saying earlier. I
Yeah.
can see a little bit more contempt potentially being
Yeah,
bred out of that situation.
for sure. And this is also where the idea comes from of comparing yourself to someone else. The moment that you work hard and you do what you think is necessary in order to succeed, um, well, it's not a far fetched idea that those people generally expect some sort of cherry at the end of the road, pretty much. And then when they see others that seemingly for them put in a lot less work, they do succeed. Yeah, fully 100% that can create resentment. It's literally the whole idea, and I believe the quote literally from Peterson was, "Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today." Which is generally speaking a very dangerous mindset that indeed, like you're pointing out, in a lot of cases can lead directly to resentment. And this is also indeed where your idea comes from, like plotting out your life and just asking yourself the question, okay, what do I want to do exactly in 5 years or in 10 years? And if that's too hard, because I can imagine that for the first time when you're first trying that, 5 years is a long time to look that far into the future. Okay, make it shorter. Maybe you can do it in 3 years. Maybe you can do it 1 year. Maybe you can do it for 6 months. Look ahead. Where do you want to be in 6 months? Do you want to have a pay increase at your job? Do you want to pick up a new skill? Do you want to speak a new language? Do you want to travel to some places? Work that out. And the moment that you figure out what you want in that specific time frame, okay, then think about the concrete steps that you can take today in order to facilitate that potential future. That's the healthy side of living it, of approaching that specific subject. That also steers you automatically, I believe at least, away from that resentment feeling, because you are literally focusing on yourself and how you as a person can improve, which is which is healthy behavior, which is what's leading to success, and has clearly also led to success for you in your specific situation. So this is a prime example.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. And yeah, I would say that I say a little bit of this with certainly a little bit of shame, just because I know, especially when I was younger, and but even still to this day, there can be certain times where you meet somebody who's just such a force of nature that you really realize how lacking you really are.
Yeah.
I think that there are some people where who've maybe like graduated high school or something like that, and I'll occasionally see them on Facebook or something like that. Especially when I wasn't married, I didn't have a kid. I wasn't really necessarily happy with where I was living. I wasn't happy with the work that I was doing. You see somebody and they're building an amazing life, and that is a huge, kind of judgment on you. At least it was for me in my own psyche to say, wow, man, they have a lot of things that is going really well for them, and there's a part of it that it's not just like chance. Don't get me wrong, like everybody has lucky breaks, but certainly there's a lot of people out there that have really made incredible situations from their lives, and when that's reflected back onto somebody who has a lot more to begin with and they've squandered it more, it can be a really harsh reality to reconcile yourself with. And I think that that's probably something that I've also learned from Jordan, is something like, when you see that, you shouldn't destroy the ideal because you don't live up to the ideal. Everybody falls short of the ultimate ideal, right? But it's
Right.
really important to have an ideal, to have a direction to move towards. That way you can continue to build on what it is that you have. And you never know, I'm sure that there are some people who would look at what I have when I'm looking at somebody else wishing what they had, that they're like, wow, I kind of wish that I had what he has. I guess everybody has their own specific situation. And the most important thing is I think one is to be really grateful for the fact that you even have the opportunity to improve at all, but also to be happy for the things that you do have in your life. I can't tell you how happy I am that I've met my wife and that she's the woman that she is. She's such a good bulwark for all of the craziness that I am.
And she was the girl that you met when you moved when you were 17, right? So the one that you reconnected with in the beginning of high school that you mentioned.
Yeah, that is correct. So we had actually dated.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was certainly a good idea to have a little bit of rapport already built.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a little bit of a weird situation. I can tell you if you want. But I was
Go ahead.
at the time I had just graduated high school and I moved down to Casa Grande and I was living on my own, doing my own thing. And at first, I've never really been much of a partier. I really like talking to people, and I love social interactions. But at the time, I was only 19. And just out of curiosity, at what age can you drink? You said you're in South Holland?
Yeah, so in Holland in general, South Holland is a province actually, it's not in the south of Netherlands, it's in the west. But to answer your question, at 18 years old, you are legally allowed to drink.
Yeah, and so in the States you have to be 21, but that certainly doesn't keep the opportunity from presenting itself. But I was never really very interested in pursuing that. I would say probably up until I had moved out of my aunt and my uncle's house who I was staying with at the time, establishing myself at my job to make sure that I wasn't going to get fired or anything like that, and I actually had the ability to generate my own income.
Check.
And I had moved out and I didn't really have a whole lot to do. I was working a kind of a crappy shift. It was sorry, can we cuss on this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
But yeah, and so it was just a really bad shift. I was working from 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. on a fairly regular basis, probably like 5 or 6 days a week. And I remember I was in a town where I didn't really have any friends because I just moved there. All of my coworkers are, 30s and up for the most part. They all have kids and families and stuff like that. And I didn't really have anything to do. And so I kind of went down a little bit more of like a hedonistic rabbit hole, I would say. I was more just bored, getting stir crazy, and I just decided that I wanted to do something. And it was right about then, I think, that I started to listen to Jordan, and it was at that point that he would talk about, having a more meaningful life. And I remember it was...
This was which year?
This would be in probably 2016.
2016.
So I graduated.
Oh, okay.
I graduated in 2016, and almost right after I graduated, I had moved down to Casa Grande and got this job, and I was there for probably a year and a half or so, but I would say probably in the first half of my career there, it's when I had started to listen to Jordan talk about stuff, and one of the things that I used to listen to him discuss was the idea of marriage. For whatever reason, I just found it interesting. And one of the things that he'd said about marriage was he was explaining the idea of marriage to his students, where it was essentially something like life is tragedy. Nobody really has nobody's a saint, and everybody's probably a little bit worse off than they think. And the whole idea behind marriage is having somebody that you can have a permanent agreement with, essentially, to say that you're never going to leave, you're always going to do right by them and not betray them, essentially, and that you would be able to, stake out all of the craziness that goes on in life. You'd be able to stake it out with the other person. You'd be able to permanently bind yourself.
Your meaningful foundation.
Exactly. And at the time, I started to think, have I ever met anybody in my life who I would think that I could do that with? Because that's, quite a quite a goal, I would say. And it was so strange because I remember at the time I was working in a warehouse and I was driving a forklift, and I was listening to Jordan's lecture on my phone, but I had to download the lecture because I didn't get service. I was
Hmm.
working in like a gigantic concrete cooler, and
Yeah,
so I
those
had,
usually don't have a good connection.
yeah, no kidding. Especially with as big as this one was, you'd get
Yeah,
to the center of it, and you're 100 feet from any sort of 8-inch thick concrete wall.
yeah. And you didn't have any Wi-Fi or something that you could use?
No, they didn't want us being on our phones, I think, while we were working, so they weren't
Right. Okay.
super
Yeah.
excited to supply us with
It makes sense.
Wi-Fi.
It makes sense. Yeah.
But yeah, so I had to download the lectures onto my phone, and I would listen to them while I was working. And it was so weird because I remember he had said that, and I had really started to think a lot about the idea of who I could do that with. And I had thought of my wife. We had dated in high school, and she was somebody that I always trusted. It ended up not working out for us just because I was very immature at the time, and I wasn't really looking for a serious relationship,
Hmm.
especially at 16 or 17 years old. But I remember I had thought of her, and it was so strange because my phone had rang, and it was like in the middle of this cooler, which I don't get service in anyways. But my phone started ringing, and I looked at it, and it was her. She was calling me. It was so strange, and I decided, boy, I really feel like I should answer this. And so I remember I was unloading pallets in a like a big racking system.
Hmm.
And so I dropped the pallet that I was on, and I drove my forklift out to the outside of the building, just outside where you'd get a couple of bars. And I went out there, and I actually she ended up telling me that one of our close friends in high school had died, and and they were dating as well. Yeah, it was very, very strange. So the three of us, his name was Spencer. The three of us had been pretty close in high school, and then after I had dated my now wife and then broken up with her, it kind of created this weird rift in the relationship, I would say. And I also knew that my friend Spencer had always really liked her, but for whatever reason, he never really. I think that it was because he was in a relationship for quite a while when we had all kind of become friends,
Hmm.
and his relationship had ended, and I think that we had probably started dating by that time. But anyways, I knew that he really liked her, and they ended up dating. And it was super weird because I thought about her, and then I had gotten this phone call from her telling me that our friend had died. And that was really, really weird. Um, and I'm not entirely sure why it all happened like that, but it was very strange. And so I remember I told her that I would be there to help plan, the funeral, kind of run any errands or anything like that. And she was having a really, really hard time with it. I would say that there are different categories in life that you can say, to make another analogy. Let's say you have a stack of metaphorical poker chips that you can invest your time into on life, and you're
Hmm.
kind of it's kind of a bet because you don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, but there are different proportions that you can distribute your time out to. And I would say, some people sink a lot of time into their career, other people sink a lot of time into friendships, other people sink a lot of time into family, and she sunk a ton of her chips, her proverbial chips, into her relationships. And
Right.
so she's always been a very, very kind person. Very,
Social.
she's very social, and she's close knit. She's very
Hmm.
caring. She's very loving.
Hmm.
And she had sunk a lot of her chips into, her relationship. They were going to get married. They were a great couple,
Hmm.
and um, they were probably maybe one of the people that I saw that had all of their stuff together. That was that ideal kind of relationship that I would recognize, be like, wow, it'd be amazing to have a relationship like they have. I think maybe we all know people like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I remember that she was having a really hard time, and so I went up there and I helped her figure out the funeral and everything like that, celebration of life, kind of getting all of our friends together, as well as it was kind of interesting because we had his celebration of life at our high school, and it's just it was quite a journey, I would say, and we her and I after dealing with quite a lot, we had decided that we still had feelings for each other, but we had no idea what that meant. We didn't even know how we would do anything if we were going to do anything, and it was pretty crazy and pretty chaotic. But we just kind of had. I would say that there had been through the trauma that her and I had gone through with the loss of Spencer, and I would say her primarily. They were obviously extremely close. I was really good friends with him too, and I'd spent quite a lot of time with him. But especially after I had gotten out of high school, I hadn't talked to him in months,
Hmm.
and so, but it was pretty crazy because, yeah, he'd ended up dying, and so we planned everything out. And we had the celebration of life, and it was at our high school, and it was just crazy how much of an impact he's really had in my life, I would say. But I think that going through that event really solidified a deep level of trust between her and I. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
We had, I think, in order to be able to go through something like that, you have to trust the other person. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, I don't really know if you can even have a relationship, especially at that point in time, with anybody, friendships, any sort of romantic interest. I think when something as intense as that happens to somebody, it shakes you to your core. You have a hard time talking to family members. I think you have a hard time, and this is obviously not for everybody, but um, certainly you have a hard time even talking with old friends because it's such a big part of your life that's been lost that you don't really know how to approach somebody like that.
Would you say that you were dealing with it better, whatever better may mean in this specific context, but than your then girlfriend, now wife? Or actually, she wasn't your girlfriend back then, of course.
I would say that she was certainly having a harder time with it. She was a lot closer to him than I was,
Hmm.
obviously. And I think that, there's always there's obviously the thought of, there's like a question of morality around something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Where it's like, he was my really good friend, especially for a time, I would say my best friend. And, you had all known each other in high school. Her and I had dated before, and there becomes this kind of question about whether or not what you're doing is right, whether, and I think that those questions have to be answered at a really deep level. What are your intentions? What exactly, because you can certainly see a situation in which somebody who's had a huge loss in their life is reaching out for help. And if you're there just for personal gain, then that's really horrible, because you're probably going to be manipulating somebody who's in need to gain the ends of what you would like.
When they're very vulnerable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're looking, I would say that, her and I have had some pretty crazy experiences together. And one of the experiences, she had this kind of like vision where she felt like she was drowning, where there was like this like dark pool of water that she was getting sucked into. And I think that that's a really, really good way to think about. I think this is actually exactly what Jordan Peterson talks about when he talks about, there's a huge axiomatic belief that you have in your life that collapses and then you're sucked down into chaos, right? Into like the dark sea or whatever
Yeah, I believe the specific example that he used was the example of cheating, when your partner is cheating.
yeah,
That all of a sudden
yeah,
your past is not true anymore. But I think it
yeah.
applies here as well.
yeah, and I think that that's so. It was so interesting the first time that I heard him say that because it really kind of characterizes everything that we hold. I think on like a subconscious level,
Hmm.
and it's not subconscious until it's brought to your conscious, right? Where when you realize that it's there, and when that had happened, her past, she didn't know what her past was, right? Because and he was a great guy. He never cheated on her. He was very smart. He was actually the valedictorian of our high school, and he had gotten his pilot's license and ended up losing his life in an airplane crash. And that completely changed the trajectory of her life. She wasn't quite sure where she was, and it really was kind
Check.
of being pulled down into that chaos.
Yeah.
And it was certainly scary at times, but it was one of the things that I decided where I was like, I know that she needs somebody, and I know that if she doesn't, and I don't even mean somebody like in the romantic sense, but would mean something like she needs some sort of foundation, kind of like what we were talking about before, she has to establish a new identity, you know, because there's a huge aspect of her identity. Her significant other has died, and that was something that diving into somebody who's being sucked down into black waters like that is, I think it's something that you have to take on faith. It's something that, because even like, let's say you were like a manipulative psychopath. Um, it's not like going down in there into the depths to manipulate and gain something from somebody who's in a bad position doesn't have its toll on the other individual, even the one that's benefiting. I'm saying that with air quotes.
Hmm.
There is a big price to be paid, especially for your soul. I think somebody who's willing to do that to somebody, you're paying a really big price for your own morality, your own ethics. But we had gone through that, and I think it just kind of forged this sort of bond for us that was like, we're not leaving. Like, we're not leaving. We have to figure this out. We're going to figure this out. I don't know what it's going to look like if we even figure it out, if we can even figure it out, but I know that I'm not leaving. And I
Hmm.
think that created such a strong foundation, such a strong bond of trust between her and I, that even going through other things in our past, and now with having our son, it's so freeing to be able to be with somebody that you've gone through so much with, and you've risked, so much vulnerability with, to be able
Yeah,
to
for sure.
say, I trust you, and I trust you for the most important thing. My wife and I talk about this regularly, where we think the most important thing that we're ever going to do in our lives is raising our kids. Don't get me wrong, I really love my career. She has a great career, and we love building things like that. I have wonderful family, and I love them all very much. But I think that, having my son and any sons and daughters that we have in the future, it feels like that is the most important impact I'm ever going to have on anything.
Yeah, it makes sense. And just to jump back to what you said earlier, that this specific event strengthened the bond between you and your now wife. I believe it is these kind of moments when you are really being challenged. These moments of despair, perhaps a great loss, something that is, you know, does such a great amount of damage in your life, that the moment you are able to help each other get through that, and it doesn't even need to be a romantic partner. It can also be your friend. It can be your parent. It can be, it can be a stranger that you meet on the street when something really bad is happening. An event like that is a no, well, I can think of a bonding experience that is larger than that. I honestly can't think
Yeah,
of a single example. So I think and you seem to lay it out that way, and it also seems to be, to me at least, like that. That these kind of experiences, and the moment you can get through them together in a proper, pure way, without, like you said, any manipulation. The intention is honest. If you can get through it like that, yeah, that's you can't have a bigger boost to your relationship than that.
Yeah, and I think that I've even heard some like as far as like the intensity of that bond, like you were saying, I
Hmm.
think that there are probably a lot of people who go through war who when their backs against the wall, when it is a life and death situation,
Yeah.
excuse me, and they have somebody that they can depend on, it forges that bond, such a deep bond that feels permanent, and it's um, that in your most vulnerable position maybe you've ever been in your whole entire life, um, you have somebody who's there that you can trust, and that it did create an exceptional bond. I've never had a relationship like the one that I have right now. I've had several relationships in my life, and there has always been a certain period of time where doubt will creep in, whether that's about whether or not your partner is being faithful, whether that's about what if your partner really kind of wants the best for the relationship. I think that I had heard Jordan talk about a marriage ceremony that he had seen in I think it was the Netherlands, or maybe it was Sweden, and it was a marriage ceremony where they had both. I think that they had this like candle that they held between them, up above them, and he was talking about how symbolically that represents that it's not one person or the other is right in a relationship. It's the highest point that is the candle or the light that is supposed to be the guiding force, if that makes sense.
The eye of providence, the all-seeing eye.
Oh, I
I
had
think you're
no
referring
idea
to.
what the yeah. What is that?
I think it's the when you look at a dollar bill. I think it's on a dollar bill at least. You have this
I
pyramid,
see.
and above the pyramid is
Yes.
another small pyramid with an eye in it.
Yep.
That's the eye of providence. I think that's what you're referring to.
Wow. That is yeah. I would agree with that. That is a super interesting connection. But yeah, I would say that that's something that it's funny because I had told my wife I wish I had proposed to her 6 months after we started dating, but just because I didn't realize it at
Hey,
the
you,
time.
you you did. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I'm certainly in a much better position now having married her.
Yeah, absolutely. Good for you, man.
Yeah, thank you. But I remember I had told her that I wished that I had because I didn't realize it at the time. But
Hmm.
in that moment, um, I was committed to the eye of providence, right? I was committed to the highest form of love and virtue in our relationship together than I was to myself or even just to her specifically. And I
Hmm.
think that when you're able to find that with somebody, I think that was the moment that I realized that I made the mindset transition to effectively being married without actually having a ceremony. And it wasn't, I'm a little bit of a slow guy. I didn't realize that I should be proposing until, 5 years later. So, but yeah, just out of curiosity, if you don't mind my asking, what would you say was the first big impact that Jordan Peterson's work had with you? Like, what kind of caught your attention about him?
Well, just like you, I saw one of his videos. I believe it was on the university in Canada that there was a rally around him, where there
Ah,
was just a bunch of kids that were around him, yelling nonsense, and he was trying to make a point about freedom of speech in reference to Bill C-16, which was a thing back then. Um, and that video, I believe, just popped into my I'm not sure if it was YouTube or somewhere else, but it just popped into my view by the algorithm who gave me that video. And I don't really remember what the title was, but I know that my expectation when I went to that video was, okay, there's probably this crazy old man who is gonna rant, stuff like that. It's probably like a very, what would the word for it be? A very controversial video, but nothing really that interesting. So I just checked it out. It was just one of many other videos, and I was listening to it, and um, actually rang quite a bit of bells, especially regarding the whole freedom of speech situation. And the second thing that really annoyed me was the way that those so-called students, or I'm not even sure if they were students or just people that were there just to scream and yell with their microphones and their speakers, but regardless, it really annoyed me how they were approaching the conversation, which wasn't a conversation at all. So I just
Yeah, it was
checked
super
it
bad
out.
faith.
Yeah, it was very, very bad faith, 100%. It was quite a terrible video. I didn't enjoy it at all. I just found it interesting. So it triggered me to look him up. I think, I'm not even sure what I did. If I Googled his name or if I did something else, I'm not even sure what I did. But I do know that with some pathway, I found out that he had a YouTube channel which had a bunch of lectures that were, I believe, dating back to 4 or 5 years before that. So I think, I'm not really sure if what I'm saying right now is correct, but since 2011, 2012, something like that, there were quite a bit of lectures.
Yeah.
And there were just a few that caught my eye. I believe. Yeah, so I'm really digging into my mind right now, trying to figure out what the videos were. I think it was not really political. Well, I believe there was a lecture about communism that I found interesting. Yeah, I'm not really sure what the order of the videos was, but regardless, I checked out a few and I really enjoyed actually the content. It made me, well, just like you described earlier, it gave me the words to describe ideas that couldn't be defined in words without hearing them first in those videos, which was very, very interesting. It's a very interesting sensation. It's something that usually, when you have a really good mentor that really tries to understand you and tries to formulate what you're saying, tries to create not meaning, but tries to create sense out of the nonsense that you're speaking, pretty much.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
then then echoing that back to you, right? So you can do something with that. That's what this felt like. So yeah, that was pretty much my starting position, just the same year as you in 2016 when C16 was happening, which was a travesty to begin with. I'm not even sure if why it went through, but although anyway, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, it was that starting point. Yeah.
That is super interesting. Yeah, I think that I had seen the same lecture that you were talking about. I think that it was his Maps of Meaning course,
Right.
and it
Yes,
was
it was.
talking about Solzhenitsyn and like
Dostoevsky.
the fall of like the Soviet Union. Or yeah, Dostoevsky. Yeah, yep.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
I had never even known any of that. Going up through school, I didn't learn about any of that.
No, it's quite interesting. There's a lot of things that you don't really learn about, and these are definitely very important things. What is politics to begin with? What is communism? How do you handle money? Is another way. So it's kind of a segue. But how do you deal with money? We
Yeah,
learn what the economy is. We learn it on a macro level. What is inflation? That kind of stuff. But okay, how do you make a budget? How do you take care of your family? How do you spend what you have? What percentage should you set aside? What percentage can you spend? Stuff like that. I don't know how it
yeah,
is over there, but we don't learn it over here.
yeah. No, we definitely didn't learn it over here. It was so funny that you mentioned that because last night we had gone and gotten some food and played some mini golf with some family members of mine.
Oh, nice. Are you any
Um,
good?
oh no, not really.
All
I
right.
have a set of clubs and I really like to play golf, but it's kind of one of those things to where I just acknowledge that every single time I go out there, it's going to be a lot of learning in the day.
Right. I've never golfed in my life.
Yeah, it is. At least for me, one of the most frustrating sports I have ever played in my whole life.
Right. Okay.
Every it's such small inputs that you have with like how you swing the club or how you follow through or on what side of the face of the club you hit will have such massive changes for how the ball goes, and so it's very maybe a good word for that, for at least for me, is tedious. It's
Hmm.
very, very minute, very like subtle changes that you have to make. But yeah, so we were out last night. We were playing mini golf, and when we were done, we were driving home, and we were moving from one freeway onto another one. We were in the middle of the overpass, and my tire had gone flat. You know, there was probably something sharp in the road or something like
Yeah.
that, and it had cut the sidewall of the tire. And unfortunately, you know, we're 100 feet in the air on this freeway overpass, and I can't, you know, stop. And so I just have to, you know, unfortunately ride on this flat tire. You know, I have to slow way down, throw on my hazards. I'm sure that everybody was super aggravated with me. But I, you know, ended up pulling over and I jacked my car up and I pulled the tire off and I put on the little donut that my car has in the trunk.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny because I was talking to my wife about it and I was all like, you know, if this had happened to us probably closer to when had just gotten together, probably like 5 or 6 years ago or something like that, this would probably really provoke a lot of anxiety because like we didn't have like a savings or anything like that. We didn't know how to handle money or anything. And now we have this, you know, I think it's going to be like $400 for 2 new tires or something like that. And we have to figure out, hey, where's this money coming from? You know, I don't get paid until this day. Okay, but I'm going to have to get to work, which means, you know, if I'm not going to be able to drive my car. And before it would have just caused a ton of anxiety. Whereas, you know, now we have a nice savings and we're able to budget everything and stuff like that. And when it happened, instead of ruining an absolutely perfect evening, it was kind of like this really memorable cherry that, you know, we're going to be able to talk about in the future, you know, whereas all like, you remember that one night when we were driving home, the tire
Yeah,
went out, it was
exactly.
crazy. Yeah. And
Laughing about it.
and how much that really changes,
Yeah.
your perspective on things. And I think, man, the financial aspect, I think that Jordan had talked about getting some more financial handling sort of classes on there and lectures and stuff like that onto Peterson Academy. I'm really excited about that. I'm really
Oh,
excited to
really?
kind of get that. Yeah, I think that if I'm not misquoting, I think it was one of his more recent podcasts, maybe not the last one, because that was the interaction that he had with a gentleman and all of the craziness going on in the UK right now.
Yeah, I saw that. I believe his name is Robertson, that video.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think you're right. Is it Tommy Robinson?
W. Robertson, yeah, and he did it together with his wife, I believe. It was a three-way conversation.
Yeah, that was it's pretty incredible to hear some of the stories that are coming out of that. I think that right now is, especially with the digital revolution, with the fact that we have internet now and everything like that, it's incredible that you know what's going on in such an intense manner in a country, you know, that's 5,000 miles away from you or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's quite a bit of happening over there. I didn't really see the interview yet. I do have it in my watch list, and I'll check it out later. For some reason, apparently this name Tommy Robinson is pretty controversial, but I'm not
Yeah,
sure why yet as of this moment. So I am aware to some degree about what's happening in the UK, but I'm not
yeah,
sure if that what I have in my mind right now is actually also why this guy is controversial. So I don't have those dots tied yet.
fair.
But yeah, that's something I guess for another time. But let's go back to your story about mini golf,
Sure.
because I'm gonna make a little segue here. Let's discuss
Sure.
fitness. You're
Yes.
quite a fitness guy, I believe, right?
Yeah, you know, I really like fitness. I certainly wouldn't say that I'm the most fit I've ever been. You know, I think that having kids will do that to you.
Yeah,
But
I can
but
imagine.
yeah, no, I just went for like a little run this morning. But yeah, I would say that certainly nothing unusual, maybe.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
And what?
I got into like lifting weights when I was in high school, and when I had moved down to Casa Grande, that's actually one of the habits that I had picked up. As I really got into lifting weights.
Hmm.
I decided that I wanted to put on a lot more muscle, and I had gotten a personal trainer for some obscenely large amount of money at the time because, again, I didn't know how to handle any money.
Hmm.
And I remembered this was just something that I really wanted to do. It was something that I had started to get into, and yeah, it's also probably something else that's brought a lot of work ethic into my life. I think it's also helped normalize the idea of pain because there's a lot of aspects of working out, whether it's lifting weights, running, learning a sport, or something like that, that can just be painful.
Can you walk me through your weekly schedule? What do you do? Which days do you focus on specific techniques or specific exercises, or how does your week look like, generally speaking?
Yeah, so I would say that right now, I'm certainly trying to get back into the groove, especially after having our son.
Hmm.
But I would say, I probably just occasionally go for like a run or something like that. I will lift weights, but it's nothing crazy. It's mostly like bench press with like dumbbells and stuff like that. It's not like I have like a gym membership or anything like that, and like I don't have access to a squat rack or anything. But it's pretty unstructured at the moment. I kind of just work out when I can.
Hey, you can go very far with just a bench and a couple of dumbbells, and that's more than enough that you need for to do pretty much every single muscle that you can think of.
Yeah.
And especially with your run, so you also get your cardiovascular in. That sounds to me like pretty well rounded off. You don't need very fancy equipment. That's what I found. I used to go to the gym as well, and it was quite expensive.
Yep.
It was like €100 a month for a luxury gym. I won't mention the name, but it was a gym that also had a pool and those kind of things. And it was cool. They had very fancy equipment. They had cable rows. They had whatever you could find. But do you need all of that? Especially for
Right.
that price, just a bench, couple of weights, you can do a whole lot.
Yeah, that is very true. I think that the most important things that people don't really think about is just like the exercises where you get the most bang for your buck. I would say as long as you're doing compound exercises and you're doing some sort of progressive overload, you're probably going to be getting some pretty exceptionally good results. And as long as you're sticking with it, right? That's the biggest thing is consistency.
Yep.
If you did, 100 push-ups a day, even just scattered throughout the day, but you did that every single day, like you're gonna put on a lot of strength, a lot of muscle and stuff like that. And it's gonna help give you, a good scaffolding, I think, to create a schedule on. Especially as I get older, that's something that I've noticed. Working out is almost something like it's almost more beneficial to work out just so that way you have like a baseline to plan things around. If you don't really have a schedule and everything is just kind of scattered to the winds, I think that it's really hard to be able to focus. I know now, especially with having a son, if I want a good workout or something like that, I'm going to have to get up before he wakes up and before my wife wakes up. That way I'm going to be able to have an opportunity to get out there before I'm needed as a father to help take care of my son. And
This how do you maintain your discipline?
I would say that probably just knowing that in the long run, it really is going to be best for me. It's certainly something that you know, one of the tricks that I'll use is just doing something that interests me. And so, for instance, I have a really big passion for like training my dogs. I like teaching them new commands. I like going and doing new things with them. And something that I've been working on lately is when I go running, is I'll have them running next to me. It's a gravel path,
Hmm.
but I'll take their leashes off, and I've taught them basic commands like heel or follow or something like that. And it's kind of interesting because you get to run. One, they help you keep really good pace because they're super good at running. But also it's good because there's kind of another interesting thing going on there is I'm teaching a new command, or I'm teaching something new as I'm going out there. And so that's something that I've always gotten a lot of pleasure out of, is going out and running with my dogs, whether it's like exploring a wash or something like that. It's cool. I think that there's something that's always interested me in psychology, which includes probably like animal psychology. I really think it's super interesting how my dogs learn, how they contextualize themselves in our relationship. And so probably adding that on to the run really, really probably helps motivate me to get out there and do it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I actually learned something lately, and that's from Andrew Huberman, from the podcast Huberman Lab. He was talking about, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but he was talking about the anterior mid cingulate cortex, AMC for
Yes.
short. And apparently that's a critical brain region that literally physically grows the moment you do tasks that you pretty much don't want to do, when you do very challenging things. And
Yeah,
apparently, and I'm quoting here because once again, this guy is an absolute genius. I love talking. I love listening to his podcast. But apparently,
definitely.
when that part of the brain grows, so when you're doing tasks you don't want to do or that are very challenging, well, first of all, it enhances the willpower and tenacity of a person. Second of all, apparently it also boosts the cognitive function of people, and stress management is being supported, uh, which are, well, very, very beneficial things. I also think he linked that to doing, and that he mentioned it on his podcast a couple of days ago with Joe Rogan. That's also one of the reasons why he does the not it's not called the ice bucket challenge, but pretty much the cold showers. You know, you drop yourself in a bucket of cold water.
Yep.
And Joe Rogan does it completely extreme. So he does it, well,
Yeah.
in our case near zero, but I believe in Fahrenheit that's 34. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 32 is freezing, but he's probably hitting somewhere around like, 30, 34
Yeah,
degrees or something. Like there's
yeah,
ice
yeah.
in the pools of water he's getting
Yeah,
into,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is really
But
cold.
apparently that just makes sure that that you can do more challenging things in the future. That you are willing to take challenges, which is a
Yeah.
very interesting thing to think about. So with that in mind, you should actually be excited to do something that you really do not want to do, because you
Yeah.
cultivate that part of the brain.
Yeah, it is so interesting. I remember listening to the podcast that you're referencing through Huberman Lab,
Hmm.
and it was so interesting because for a while I had fallen out of fitness. You know, it had just kind of gotten a little bit more mundane. You know, I think that, unfortunately, it happened to me where sometimes it can happen. You know, you get into a relationship and everything like that, and you're super happy, and you get, I wouldn't say like complacent, but you become like so. I heard Jordan Peterson say something like, "There's a certain amount of deprivation that accounts for motivation." And I think that certainly there was a certain amount of deprivation in my life with like female interaction that was really motivating me to go to the gym.
Hmm.
And
It's
after I
a
had
very
gotten,
strong idea, very strong
yeah,
motivator.
yeah, definitely. And I think that after I'd gotten into a relationship with my now wife, and we were super, super happy with each other, and we had a great relationship that had kind of took away a certain amount of that deprivation. And because of that, I think I might have lost a little bit of motivation for that. But I would say that going back to the AMC, I forgot what the A stands for, but the mid-cingulate cortex, what was the A?
The A was anterior.
Anterior. Um, that specific podcast talking about that stuff, I remember I had contextualized it to my life. And at that point, I just started going to the gym a lot more consistently than I had before. But I noticed that there were also other effects going on in my life, which, I mean, obviously, I'm not entirely sure if they came directly from going to the gym on a consistent basis. But I remember at that point, I had started to maybe work a little bit harder or try and manifest larger a larger amount of attention from my superiors to show them that I wanted more responsibility. I was motivated, that I had a desire to move up in the
Hmm.
company. And again, it could have been a coincidence, but I thought that it was so interesting when I had heard that because I had looked at my app and I was like, wow, I've worked out 5 days a week for the last 3 months or something like that. I can't believe that I just like went almost from like not working out at all ever to like working out consistently again after not having done that, and how interesting it was that that had kind of correlated with the exact same time in the company that I was at, which I'm still in rising through higher levels of responsibility, gaining more responsibility, getting better raises,
Yeah,
being
for
able
sure.
to like manage projects versus working on single projects. And I wonder if that isn't like correlated to a better development of that AMC. And it's kind of maybe that's why there's like kind of vague descriptions on when people ask like how do you stay motivated or how do you stay disciplined. Maybe if you just do the thing that you don't really want to do for a little bit, it gets easier to continue to do it. And then everybody thinks you have a ton of discipline, and you're like, well, like it's not like maybe some people are just super disciplined, but I've never. When I was young, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I've just like never been able to do anything that I wasn't really interested in. And I think that that's just something that's kind of carried through in my life. And it's not that I've learned how to do things that are interesting to me. It's that I've learned how to cultivate my interest or something
Mm.
like that.
Yeah, it makes sense. I don't think discipline comes natural at all. I think you have to cultivate it. I think you have to work on it. I think you need to have in mind where you're gonna go, what work is gonna be required in order to go there, so that you can follow the steps that are necessary in order to reach that goal. That is what discipline is, and then sticking to it, of course. Not finding excuses like, yeah, this Netflix series is so interesting. I'm just gonna lay on the couch for this evening, right?
Yeah.
That's a killer. That's absolutely you need to work on that. It requires hard work. And for you,
Yeah.
you're doing it in the morning. You said that works best for you, right?
Yeah, it again it just kind of depends. Like this morning, because I don't work on
Hmm.
weekends, I was able to get up this morning and go for my run and kind of do my thing.
Right.
But most of the time it's, if I get home and maybe he's going down or something like that, I'll try and make it over to the gym or I'll try and get in something. But yeah, when he's asleep and most of the time that is in the morning, if I have the time, I'll try and fit something.
So how late does he usually wake up?
I would say that it kind of varies right now. So he's almost 3 months old, and so he probably wakes up somewhere between, anywhere from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. But I would say those are
Okay.
probably the extremes. Most of the time, it's somewhere between 8 and 9 o'clock, maybe.
Yeah, I can also imagine it's quite kind of random. May not be the same every single day.
Yeah, and
Okay.
there's a little bit of that is enticing too. I think that talking about how deprivation and motivation kind of go hand in hand, I can't go work out whenever I want to anymore. And there's a little bit of motivation that I feel when I'm like, oh man, I have the opportunity to work out right now. Like I know that I might not going to be able to later, and so I should do it now.
I think that wraps up most of what we wanted to discuss, Cole. Is there anything else from your side that you would like to add?
No, I can't. I can't think of anything. But again, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity. I think it's super cool what you're doing. I think you run an excellent podcast. You ask really really good questions, and so yeah, just thanks for having me on and for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate you saying that. And I also really appreciate you coming on. That's really cool. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah,
With that in
it's not a
mind, by the
problem at
way,
all.
there's one last question I would like to ask you. So,
Definitely.
what's in it for the future for you? What's your goal? What are you going to do?
Yeah, I'm actually really glad that you had mentioned that because that was actually something that I had thought about at some point before we had sat down. But I am essentially just looking to, I mean, obviously, I want to be able to grow a family. I want to have more kids and be able to raise them. Obviously, working on my relationship with Sam and making sure sorry, Sam is the name of my wife. Her name is Samantha. And being able to have an excellent marriage with her. Developing myself and everything like that is always very important for me. But something that I really wanted to do is be able to make some sort of community. I started this Facebook page. It's called Peterson Academy Phoenix, and it's essentially just for anybody who's going to Peterson Academy, if they like have the desire to join or anything like that, to be able to, I don't know, like maybe like go on like an occasional hike or something like that. Or one thing that I thought would be really funny is if we all went out to dinner or something like that, and we went to like a steakhouse because like Jordan Peterson is all into like the carnivore diet and everything. And so I
That will
thought
be
that
pretty
might
fitting.
be fun. Yeah, yeah. And so, but yeah, to essentially just establish a community of other individuals to where we can make more contacts, and as we all grow, in our own lives, to be able to have that kind of relationship and community within, I guess, like a common interest, really. But I would say that that's probably the main thing that I'm working on right now. Obviously, right now I'm going through the lectures for. I'm currently doing the Intro to Nietzsche,
Ah,
and
beautiful.
yeah, and it's a really really good course. I really like it. I've only gotten through. I'm only partway through the third lecture, so I'm still moving a little bit slowly through it. But I like make notes and stuff like that, and
Were
I'll
you
throw that up on the
were
on
you
the
already
Facebook page
bullied
as
by
well.
the AI quiz questions at the end? Because sometimes I notice that, for example, with the introduction to this is a very very good example. So the courses themselves are great,
Yeah.
the quality
Yes.
amazing. It's really good.
Totally.
What's funny is that the quiz questions seem to be AI generated. So I'm not really
fair
sure.
enough.
In the fourth or fifth episode of the Introduction to Nutrition course, the supplement creatine was being discussed, but
Yep.
specifically not the creatine that everybody knows as creatine monohydrate, but a different form of
Yep.
creatine, phosphate, I think it's called, or something like that.
Oh, how interesting.
But monohydrate wasn't mentioned yet in the quiz questions. They asked the question, which is the most common form of creatine that has been that has the most academic research behind it. Well, I knew because I'm taking creatine for a couple of years now already, so I knew that the answer was monohydrate. But for the reason that it wasn't mentioned in the lecture, I was like, this quiz probably doesn't know the answer, so I'm gonna go for the one that was mentioned in the video, and it was wrong. It was monohydrate.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the
How
quiz questions
interesting.
were playing mind games a little bit, but I assume it's gonna get better in the future updates.
I would say, yeah, I noticed that a little bit. So I wasn't quite sure. So the first quiz that I took for the
Hmm.
Intro to Nietzsche, I think I had gotten 9 out of 10 right.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, but when I was going through there, I was pretty much just working off of the notes that I had created while I was going through the lecture.
Hmm.
But it was interesting because I do remember there were several questions that, when asked, there was ambiguity around the answer. And I would say, and I take, I mean, look, I'm certainly, like I said, I've never gone to college, so this is all going to be, in
Yeah,
ignorance
yeah, yeah.
to actual academics. But I would say that I take really good notes. I feel like they're very thorough. I feel like they're structured very well. And when there was ambiguity surrounding one of the questions, I decided to go back and look through my notes and see what I had written down.
Hmm.
And I remember even going back through my notes and looking, there was still ambiguity surrounding the answer. And so I just went ahead and I took what I thought was the correct answer. It turned out to not be the right answer. But then I had also noticed somebody else had mentioned like something very similar. I think it was also on the Intro to Nietzsche course, where it was essentially when it was mentioned where the answer to the question should have manifested. It was like in the lecture, it was like lightly touched on, and then it was moved on, and the actual specifics of the answer that they were looking for wasn't really hit directly in the lecture.
Right, yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
and
noticed
so
that a couple of times too.
I hope it gets better, but
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I know that. I think it was mentioned up front. There will be a huge AI component within Peterson Academy. So for now, that seems to be manifesting itself in the quiz questions. I also know that I believe it's when the exams come out, they will have like AI double checking, or it's like pretty much an anti-AI AI. That's how I understood it. So they want to prevent people from obviously cheating on their exams, right, by using ChatGPT or Copilot or something like that. And apparently, with all the data that they have collected, for example, from future authoring, the future authoring program by Jordan Peterson and by some other platforms that they've created, including the Peterson Academy, they seem to be able to, at least that's what they claim, they seem to be able to notice when someone is cheating. And obviously they're not going to get into the specifics, so they're not going to explain to people how it's working, because then if we know how it's working, you can abuse it, of course.
right.
But that's also what the AI is being used for. So those are the two specific use cases I know of, but there might be more that I'm not aware of right now. But regardless, I'm really glad you're enjoying it. Certainly, I am enjoying it also very much. Just finished the Introduction to Nutrition course, and I'm about to start with the Symbolism and Christianity course. It looks to be absolutely amazing with Jonathan Pajot. Great guy.
Yeah, I've listened to Jonathan Pajot a couple of times, and every single time I listen to him about it, it like blows my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I have my experience with him is not so large yet, so I have probably way less experience with him than you. But from what I have seen, yeah, this is definitely something worth watching. So 100%, I'm going to go for that.
That's awesome. Yeah,
All
of
right,
course,
sir.
of course.
It was an absolute pleasure having you on call. Thank you very much once again for joining.
Yeah, thank
Great
you
having
again
you.
so much. I really appreciate it. You have a lovely day.
You too. Take care. And with that, Driescher has left the conversation. You can find the Facebook group he mentioned, the Peterson Academy group for people in Phoenix, Arizona, in the description below. I want to thank you for joining me in this conversation, and I hope you found it useful. With that said, take care.